right, it looks like we're up and running on YouTube now. So welcome to those who are joining us online. I hope the comments will be working this week. We've had some issues with those not always coming through. So hopefully that works this time. If it doesn't, as always, you can text or email Val or me, and we'll bring those comments into the conversation as we go through together. But with any luck, that will work this time. But welcome, glad you're here with us. Another week of Lent is going by, and so we are continuing with our series. And as you all know, that this time, rather than doing a Bible study where we picked a passage and working our way through it, we're going to continue reading one psalm every week. But before we get to that psalm, that's kind of the closure of our time together, we're going to just talk about these practices that we've been doing. So we've been following through those practices from Sarah Bessey, the 40 simple practices for Lent, and just working our way through those. And even if we don't everyone get every practice every day, perhaps we're all doing something and joining in some way. And so we're going to just talk about those again today and see what that experience has been like, and what we're learning, what we're noticing, and what we're finding about ourselves and about God during this journey through Lent together. And so shall we go ahead and turn our attention there? Any other opening thoughts before we jump in? All right. Well, do you all have your lists? They're online, and you can also, there's a printable version if you prefer paper. But I guess we're starting with, let's see, where are we? Day 11, is that right? Are we all on day 11? So just as a reminder that Sundays sort of don't count as you're going through this. So we skip over Sundays, and Sundays are a good day to reflect back on the other practices you've done that week, but Sunday doesn't get its own day in this listing of 40 days. So we're up to day 11. And I'll just read that for us, and then we can see what people's experience was of that. It says to look at your bookshelves and ask yourself, where are the women, the people of color, disabled voices, LGBTQ plus voices, the ones who come from a different tradition? Ask yourself, who is forming my spiritual life and whose voices are missing? And then there's a little PS. You could even join us for Field Notes Book Club as a start. But whether anyone did that or not, I think that the broader question of, whose influence is shaping our spiritual lives and whose voices are missing from that? Perhaps that's as good a question to start with as any. Did anyone give some thought to that this week?
Well, I did, and I thought back to my younger days when I was just starting, and I felt like at University Baptist Church, Paul Phipps and the Garrisons were a major influence as I was growing up.
Yeah, I think we might kind of touch on that in worship a little bit this week, actually. But the people around us are so much of who shape our spiritual lives, and especially those, if you grew up in a church, grew up going to Sunday school, those teachers along the way, and those people that you're around, their voices shape our spiritual experience, as well as people that we read about and read from. So anybody else have thoughts about that?
I recently, at the start of the pandemic, joined a book club, and we're just with friends from college and stuff like that. And the book that we're currently reading is called American War, and it's by this Egyptian Canadian author. And it was really interesting because it's sort of I guess I'm not done with it, but it's told from the perspective of a young girl who grew up in what the author kind of views as the future of what America might become. If the climate change continues, there might be civil war, and she's kind of caught in the middle. And it's told from her perspective of kind of seeing her family, like they're completely innocent, but they're caught in the middle, and then they're broken apart. And then eventually she becomes radicalized, and so it kind of helps me see things from that perspective, like white people can become terrorists, for example, just because of, what they had to face growing up as completely innocent children. And so when I saw this day 11, I thought of this book that I'm currently reading.
I think that's a really good reminder that our spiritual lives gets formed by more than just nonfiction, but that fiction can also really form us in deep ways. And reading fiction that is written by people who bring a different perspective onto issues that we ourselves are dealing with can be really, really helpful. I, if several months ago, maybe it was this past summer, read a book that was a retelling of the Pride and Prejudice story, but it was written by a Black author with Black teenagers in the Bronx in New York as the main characters. And it was so fascinating because it was this story that I was so familiar with. I love Pride and Prejudice. It's been one of my favorite books forever. But that difference in perspective of a Black author and Black characters brought depth to the story that I otherwise never would have seen or learned. And it was just so, so great. And it felt really formational to read that work of fiction. And so finding ways to balance, like reading books that are distinctively about spirituality and other books, I think is a part of it.
When I look through the list about, I feel like I have read more books this winter from people, written by people of color. And I think that's just maybe part of what's been going on in our world. I mean, Just Mercy was one of them, and then the one, Weren't the Other Sons, and Cast. Aaron made it through Cast. I haven't made it all the way through that one yet, but those are both by the same author. And I've read another one, and I cannot think of the name of it, but a really good one. One that Aaron lent me. Will, you may have read it. A young girl growing up in California and the hood. I mean,
The Hate You Give? Is it
The Hate You Give. I mean, that those really put you in a different place, a different perspective. All of those, and those just happen to be some of them, the ones I've read this winter, and that's an interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting, this conversation with, behind me now is a lot of my work books, my seminary books and things like that, and also some that just lived in this office when I moved in. So it's a combination of things, and that this conversation is a big conversation in academia too, as well. Which authors are we reading? When you take a theology course, are you just reading the works of, well, they always say, dead white men, right? Are you reading about these ancient not ancient, but European thinkers from a couple hundred years ago? Is that what we're reading about in theology? Is that what's shaping us? And for a long time, that's kind of been what you read, is European and American men. And so realizing, I think we're missing something of the human experience and missing something of God then as well, if we are assuming that all wisdom comes through Europe. And so diversifying some of the canon of what we read in theology and biblical studies and how we read the Bible is different depending on our context. And so I think it's really important in fiction, but also in theology and biblical studies and all these different things too, to hear different voices and different perspectives.
I think also, especially because over the past 20 to 30 years, statistics show that the church, like globally, is growing the fastest in South America and the African continent. And so if the church is growing the fastest in Africa, then it would make sense that I should be reading and learning from African theologians and scholars and pastors. But so much of what gets published and what gets put in front of me is still very American centered. And so I have to take some responsibility to seek out other options. Any other comments on that before we move on to day 12? Okay. Day 12 says, think of 5 people who inspire you or others on social media, amplify their voices or buy their books, send them an encouraging note, or share their work with a friend. Anyone have specific inspirational people or authors that came to mind with that?
I have a high school classmate. Many of you may know him, Jim Carpenter, who was a photographer, ran Gitchell Studio for a while. He's now retired. And he only uses his cell phone camera now, not a regular camera. But he posts things on Facebook, beautiful pictures, things that, I mean, I would see and not think, or maybe not even think about pulling out a camera, but he captures things in such a way. He has that photographer's eye, and it's just awe-inspiring to see some of his photos that he posts. And I've, and I know him, but I really had never said anything to him. And so I sent him a message thanking him for posting those beautiful photos that he sees in his eye and takes with his camera on his phone. And he responded back a nice thank you. So, I mean, and he's a Christian and somebody that I really admire, both for lots of things. But it was neat to kind of, because you don't think about sometimes thanking those people and reaching out to them. You just admire their work.
Yeah, we do that with all different kinds of artists pretty frequently, is we don't think to reach out and tell them how much we appreciate the work that they do. I shared a few podcasts this week. A couple of them, I shared screenshots of episodes on my Instagram story and tagged the creators in them. Or one of my favorite podcasts is The Bible for Normal People. And it's it's been 4 or 5 years that they've been going. And the two guys who run the podcast are a Bible scholar and a pastor who just do really great work to kind of help break down the deep scholarly kind of stuff that's going on in the world for the average person in the pew. And so I shared a few episodes with some of our students this week to say, hey, like, you've been asking a question about this thing and this episode kind of addresses it. And so that's a really good one, I think, to share with people when you are trying to kind of do some faith-based conversation. It's an easy way to have something to discuss together.
Sorry, I slipped out for just a second, but this week I bought the book by Sarah Bessey, who's made this list, but she has a new book, A Rhythm of Prayer, that's it sounds like it's a wonderful book with lots of prayers from a lot of people and an interesting set of voices there. So I'm excited about reading that when it arrives. That was.
Were you able to find it in stock? I haven't been able to find it in stock anywhere.
It should come sometime soon. So we'll see. Yeah, when it comes out, I'll let you know.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on day 12? Day 13, donate 40 things to a charity or thrift shop. How did that go? Anybody give that a shot?
Well, go ahead, Shirley.
I had fun going through stuff I hadn't gone through in ages, clothes, jewelry, whatnots that were stored in drawers and stuff. So I didn't have a very hard time finding 40 things.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was going to take them to SPCA, but I couldn't because they're remodeling. So I can't really deliver them until this week.
Yeah, I took Wednesday to contact AmVets. They used to contact us and send us stuff in the mail and come like every couple of months, and you could just donate stuff out of on your front porch basically, and they picked it up. And then when the pandemic hit, they kind of stopped, but they are doing, you can call them or go online and make an appointment and they can come pick stuff up. And so we had stuff that we had gathered. I've got a lot more than 40 items. I mean, we've got a bunch of stuff that we've been kind of saving. And so I used Wednesday to make an appointment for a week from Monday. They're going to come by and I'm going to leave it out on our front porch and they're going to pick it up. So it was kind of donating, even though the donation didn't happen that day, but it's nice that they are still doing that because they used to do it on a regular basis, but they're just not.
Well, or they send out the notices and the pickup time was 2 weeks ago because the post office didn't get it to people. I've heard that happen too.
Yeah.
But we hadn't even received any notices recently, but you can reach out to MVets if anybody's interested.
We had had a notice from them that the pickup time was going to be this past Monday, and somehow or another I missed it, and so I have a couple of bags. So I was trying to specifically designate one bag with 40 items, and I thought, this is harder than I thought. But I'm still working on it. I'm going to have my 40-piece bag, so in addition to another bag.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like we're kind of awash in stuff at our house with, with kids, the toys and things. They're always outgrowing stuff, and so there is going to be stuff coming and going. But it's, I don't know. Reflecting on this makes me think about how much stuff our lives are filled with, and so aside from a little bit of decluttering and a little bit of perhaps giving to others, what do we learn by doing this? Why does give away 40 things belong on a Lenten practices list? What about this as a Lenten practice? What do we learn about God from this?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like the Lenten practice of giving up something. I mean, it's giving up things that you're really have used in the past and have benefited from, but maybe you don't use now, and somebody else can benefit from them. So, okay, should we be doing that? And I'm as guilty as the next person of not doing it as much. Should we be sharing our faith with people? It's been good to us, and we're still using it, but it's not like we can't give of it as well. But do we think about giving up items, but a little bit quicker almost sometimes than giving up ourselves and our faith in that way.
Yeah, that's a great point. I like that. Not just giving up stuff. How do we give our faith? How do we give ourselves too? And because I think so much of giving up with Lent is we are thinking about how do we give up ourselves and our self-centeredness and our self-interest on behalf of something bigger, on behalf of other people and on behalf of God. And what does that look like? And maybe giving away some of these things helps us to get in the habit of giving ourselves away to others.
On YouTube, Diane Mundell said, so many unnecessary things that clutter our lives. We should also unclutter our minds.
That's true.
And I really think, Diane, I like that point because I do feel like uncluttering my life has a habit of helping me just work things out in my mind. Whether it's, some days that I'll pull everything out of my kitchen cabinet and rearrange all of the cans and all of those things, even just reorganizing and getting things in a little bit neater fashion helps me to feel like I'm decluttering things in my mind as well.
Yeah, Lent is a good season for that, isn't it? It seems like it's declutter is a good way to think about a lot of these practices, sort of paring down to what's most essential, what's really at the center. And I think a lot of us have been reflecting on that all this past year. It's about a year now since the pandemic started. And so what have we lost when we lost so many things? Okay, what is at the center? What is important? What is most critical to us? All right, so day 14, educate yourself about whose land you are living on by visiting nativeland.ca and learn something about the people. If there's a learning center nearby, plan a visit. So anybody have any experience this week of researching a little bit about who was here before we were?
Yeah, I went to the website and it's pretty user friendly. You just type in your address and then it tells you. So apparently where we live, this used to go on to the Monaco Tribes. And then I went to a website and they had some history, and they also have a museum nearby in Amherst, I think. So I think they're closed now, but I told Brian that we should go visit it once everything goes back to normal. So yeah, it was interesting to learn about that.
The Monacan Tribes, still out there. I don't know that you keep up with any Fluvanna news, but they are trying to put a pumping station down at Point of Fork, which is where the Rivanna River runs into the James. And they're trying to pump water from there up to the Zion's Crossroads area. There's a new water tower up there. But it turns out that's the Monacan capital, the historical capital of the Monacan nation. And so they are just, putting up a fuss. And right now, all of that's on hold. They've had archaeologists down there. So the Monacan, part of them are alive and well. We did the same thing, Elizabeth. So where we are right now is also the Monacan nation. We're close enough, but.
That's interesting, isn't it? Oh, just that it's past and present, right? It's not just past tense. It's and that when you see those tensions happening of, this is not just something we can remember, it is something to recognize right now.
Just put this up here briefly in case anyone didn't get a chance to look. It is a really user-friendly website. So right now I've got it zoomed in here on our area where we see the overlap of the Monacan and the Manhoaq. But if we scroll out a little bit, you can just see all of these different First People tribes that have overlapped over the years, and all of the different areas. And so I also did some looking into the area where I grew up over here in Illinois. And the town that I grew up in was actually called Prophetstown because the village that was there was home to a Indian prophet who was a big part of the reason for the Black Hawk Wars. This prophet had predicted that if Black Hawk went to war with the Americans, that the Black Hawk Indian tribes would win, which they did not. And yet, because of this big popular prophet, this area here was really just still honors that in a great way. And so it was just interesting to look at the different areas where I've lived at different points of my life and see kind of some of this. So if anyone didn't get a chance to look at this week, I'll just put a link in the chat so that you can all take a peek at some of those.
And it looks like on the YouTube chat, Charlotte Bailey mentioned visiting the same site and saying that her brother-in-law is a descendant of the Monacan tribe. So yeah. There are many ways that our present is this is not just something a long time ago that, these people used to live here, but this is, and the question of whose land is this? There's a lot to be grappled with in this history. Isn't the most comfortable. I've started hearing that occasionally on, I think it's the On Being podcast at the end that said, On Being is, at the end they give the credits, right? They say this producer and writers and all that, and they say On Being is located on Dakota land. And that's just always their sign off to say that this is also something worth acknowledging. That's kind of interesting.
And from a faith perspective, it's something that we have to wrestle with from the perspective of, Christian faith was used to colonize this area in a very distinct way and to force Native tribes into certain lifestyles. And so that's something that as Christians in a nation that has used that poorly in the past, we kind of have to wrestle with. Day 15, kind of a hard one for us to do this year because of the COVID situation we're in, but bring your own bags to the grocery store and your own mug to the coffee shop or work. I don't know that any grocery stores are really letting us bring our own bags right now for the most part.
Yeah, you actually, at Kroger, I take my own bags all the time.
Yeah, Kroger you can. Yeah.
I take my own bags in and I do the self-checkout, and so nobody ever touches any of my groceries or anything except for me. And I actually had to go to the grocery. Friday was my day to go, as it turned out. So I was actually able to do this on that day. But yeah, they're letting you do that and even encouraging you to do that.
I do it at Food Lion. When I go.
That's good to hear, because I know for a while quite a few stores were discouraging the bags being brought in just because of the possibility of COVID spread.
I think part of it as well was that if I took bags and went to somebody who was checking me out, then they wanted me to bag my own groceries. But if you go to self-checkout, I think most places that have self-checkout, and the Food Line nearest us doesn't have that. But I've still taken my own bag in, and they let me bag the groceries myself. But I think we've been doing it for years and years now. We have bags that we keep in both cars, and it just every time, either because of the size of the groceries or because I bought meat or something and they have to put something in a plastic bag, I just kind of cringe. But at the same time, when I get home, those bags go in a special bag that I then take to the recycling, because we don't ever throw away a plastic bag because it's just awful for the environment.
That's been one of the positive sides of doing curbside pickup. We haven't been in a grocery store in a year now, but we order and pay the pickup charge, and then they put it in the back of the car. But they always use paper bags. I mean, we haven't seen a plastic bag in ages, and we've been saving them. And I said the other day, they would probably be a really well place like a food bank that puts bags together. So we may try to start finding a place. I mean, we also can use them in the gardens, to put down underneath mulch. So there's so many things you can use brown paper bags for. But so we have no plastic bags. It's really amazing how few we've seen in a year.
One of the things that I thought of is that I do generally try to, if I'm going to go to a coffee shop, take my own mug with me. And so over the past year, since you haven't been allowed to do that at most places, it's forced me to really think more about when I am going out to buy coffee, what I'm doing with the cup that I receive. Am I recycling it? Am I just tossing it away? And so I've found myself doing a lot more making my coffee at home in the morning, which is very good for my budget overall. But it's made me more intentional about okay, I'll make my coffee at home because then I can use my own mug and I'm not having to create waste from something that someone gives me.
Well, the day 16, so I guess yesterday's entry was to read a poem. Mary Oliver's Wild Geese is one of my favorites, but there are many. So anybody want to share if they found a particularly good poem, meaningful poem, or if they Googled wild geese and read that one, which is a lovely poem?
I didn't read that one, and actually I didn't get around to doing it till this morning. So I just went online and Googled poetry, and there's a poems.com, and they have a daily poem. I'm going to not read it to you, but I encourage everyone to read today's from poems.com. It's kind of cute and funny and worth reading. That's all I'll say.
Yeah. Anybody else have a poem experience to share?
We just went to a book of Robert Frost and read familiar favorite poems and read multiple ones.
Yeah. Poetry and Lent seem to go well together somehow. It's sort of poetry trying to put into words things that are hard to put into words, trying to sort of reach around concepts that are hard to describe any other way. It feels like an appropriate thing to be doing. We're trying to get at the core of things and trying to figure out what God's doing in our lives. Is not always easy to say in prose. So I think sometimes these poems do a nice job of that. Maybe we can use that as a segue to our closing exercise has often been to read Psalm 90. We've tried to return to that during Lent. I don't think we've read the Message yet, have we? I don't think we've used that translation. So I'll put that up today. The Message is sort of a poetic translation, Eugene Peterson's translation, which is takes this ancient poetry and writes it in sort of modern vernacular. So I'll put the message up on the screen. If anyone would like to read that for us, I would love to hear it in anyone else's voice but my own. So I'll just put that up there, and you can, and we'll read Psalm 90 in the Message.
Okay. I'll read. Do you want to read the whole thing or just some of it?
Either way, it's 17 verses long. So if you'd like to read the whole thing, you can. If you get tired, you can stop and someone else will jump in.
I'll read 1 through 11. God, it seems you've been our home forever, long before the mountains were born, long before you brought earth itself to birth. From once upon a time to kingdom come, you are God. So don't return us to mud saying, back to where you came from. Patience. You've got all the time in the world, whether 1,000 years or a day, it's all the same to you. Are we no more to you than a wispy dream, no more than a blade of grass that springs up gloriously with the rising sun and is cut down without a second thought? Your anger is far and away too much for us. We're at the end of our rope. You keep track of all our sins, every misdeed since we were children is entered in your books. All we can remember is that frown on your face. Is that all we're ever going to get? We live for 70 years or so. With luck, we might make it to 80. And what do we have to show for it? Trouble, toil and trouble, and a marker in the graveyard. Who can make sense of such rage, such anger against the very ones who fear you?
I'll read.
Sorry.
Oh, teach us to live well. Teach us to live wisely and well. Yeah. I am unmuted, right? Okay, sorry. I'm gonna start again. Oh, teach us to live well. Teach us to live wisely and well. Come back, God. How long do we have to wait? And treat your servants with kindness for a change. Surprise us with love at daybreak. Then we'll skip and dance all the day long. Make up for the bad time with some good times. We've seen enough evil to last a lifetime. Let your servants see what you're best at, the ways you rule and bless your children. And let the loveliness of our Lord, our God, rest on us, confirming the work that we do. Oh yes, affirm the work that we do.
Thank you. I love the Message. It's just a fresh take on things so often and so poetic. And it's nice in a psalm that we've been reading and kind of know in the back of our minds. We can sort of hear the other translations as we hear this poetic translation on top of it. It's fun to read that. So thank you. I think we're at the end of our time, and so we're going to go ahead and wrap things up here. We'll continue with the practices, and as always, if you're welcome to join us next week on YouTube or on Zoom. If you're watching on YouTube and would like to be with us in person to join the conversation, let me know if you have any trouble with the technology. We'll get you connected and get you here on Zoom. Make sure you have the link. Whether you are a regular UBC member or a guest from elsewhere, we'd love to have you be part of this conversation. So, but I hope that these practices will be meaningful this week as we journey further through Lent and encounter what God may teach us through our experiences that we can share with one another. So any closing thoughts before we wrap things up and move to get ready for worship? All right. Well, thank you all for being here, and we will see you in a few minutes on worship, and then we'll see you again here next week.